Hello and welcome to the Career Speakeasy, a casual, fun, and irreverent place to share ideas about career development, the world of work, and life in general. I'm your host and proprietress, Kelly Nottingham. Growing your career should not be boring. So come on in, pull up a chair, and pick your poison. Hello and welcome everyone. Today is the first of a small series that we're going to be doing on job hunting, since we have a lot of folks, a lot of listeners who right now are in the process of looking for a new job or prepping to look for a new job. So today we're going to be talking about the value that you bring to the table and also the values that you bring to the table. So, I'd like for us to start out with a hypothetical question. Have you ever worked for a company where things just didn't feel quite right? Maybe the mission of the company was not really in line with what you felt like you should be dedicating your time to. Maybe the organization and the way that it worked just didn't really mesh with the ways that you thought that an organization should run. Maybe the job just didn't really seem to suit you very well. That's what we're going to be talking about today, because a lot of these situations, these experiences that you may have had, these experiences that I know I have had, really come down to an issue of misaligned values. Now, we have a lot of folks right now who are in the middle of a job search. As I mentioned, we have a lot of people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic and who are gearing up to start looking for jobs again in the very near future. We also have a lot of very important social justice concerns being brought to the fore in a way that many of us have not seen really within our lifetimes. So this is a great time to evaluate our values and the values of the organizations that we may be applying to as we start looking for new jobs, so that hopefully we will be able to find work that really fits in 3 key value areas. These 3 key areas are what we're going to be discussing today in this podcast. In later podcasts, we're going to be going into revamping resumes. We're going to be looking at behavioral interviewing techniques and ways to get you prepared for interviews. But today we're going to start a little bit earlier than a lot of us start in the job search process by really doing an examination of our values and how they might align or misalign with the jobs and the organizations that we're maybe looking at. So there are 3 areas. The first is your ethical compass. The second is what we in the talent management field call organizational fit. And the third is what we call job fit. So as we go through each of these 3, we're going to be looking at some examples of what it looks like when values are aligned and when they're not, and ways that you can identify where your values may not be aligned or may be really ideally aligned with a certain type of role or a certain type of organization. Now, before we get into that, I just want to put this out there. A lot of you may be thinking right now, either to yourself or you may be saying it out loud for all I know, because I can't hear you, but you can always email me to let me know if you're thinking this way. I imagine that some of you are saying right now, Kelly, okay, this is all well and good to do, some value examination, but I need a job. I don't really care if it matches up with my values right now because I need to pay my rent. I need to buy groceries. I need to get health insurance. And this is a very valid and important point. What we're talking about today is absolutely, in a word, a luxury. It's a luxury to determine whether or not we want to work for a company based on what we're going to be discussing, whether we're happy with a job based on what we're getting ready to discuss. For some people, having a job at all is critical right now, and there is no space right now to ask these questions. I myself have been in this situation. I didn't have the luxury of being picky about the work that I was doing. I had to take whatever I could get. And if you are there in your life right now, that's fine. You can listen to this podcast to give you an idea maybe of as you get a little bit more settled. Maybe you're looking for a stopgap job right now and you want to look for something a little bit longer term. Maybe you feel like you're in a bit of a crossroads in your career and you need to find something to bide your time right now and to bring in some money, that is absolutely valid. And if you want to skip this one for right now, I will not be upset with you at all because I completely understand where you're coming from on that. Now, depending on where you go to get your news, you may hear that the job market is getting ready to pick back up. You may hear that the job market is going to be down for a little while. We've had a lot of people around the world and here in the U.S. Lose their jobs. They're unemployed. They're having a hard time finding work. Companies have made drastic decisions in some cases and serious decisions to have to get rid of some folks so that they can get financially comfortable enough again, and it may take them a little bit of time to start hiring again. There are some companies that are probably sitting on job requisitions right now, waiting for the market to settle out a little bit and for them to feel a little bit more financially ready before they're going to release those jobs onto the job boards. Now, obviously, for many of you, this is a very difficult situation. My hope for everyone around the world who is dealing with unemployment right now is that as companies become more comfortable with hiring again, we're going to see an influx of jobs being offered and posted. And at that time, there will hopefully be an opportunity for those of you who are looking to find something that does align with what matters to you to be able to really find some good stuff to apply for. That's one tiny silver lining, if you will, with this pandemic, is that for a lot of people, it's giving you an opportunity to really consider what is important. Where do we spend our time and our energy? And are we spending our time and energy the way that we want, the way that we feel is important enough to expend that valuable asset of our time and that valuable asset of our energy? This is becoming much more of a trend in the workplace of the world right now, is actually to hold organizations accountable for ethical behavior, for them to be more forthright with their socio-political views so that we as consumers and we as employees of these companies can make more aligned decisions for ourselves. I think this is a very interesting time watching the marketplace adjust to this. And as we go through the discussion today, talking about these different ways of looking at values, this really hits on both the logical parts of our minds and our hearts or our guts or our instincts, like what feels right and what we think and know is right for each of us individually. And this is not all just nice to haves. As we will see as we start talking about interviewing in another upcoming podcast, I've spent years teaching interview training to hiring leaders. And organizations look for the types of value fits during the application, resume review, and interview process. So one of the goals that I have with this podcast is to flip that around a little bit and tell you how organizations look at value and values and the fit of the organization and the job with the person. Flip that around so that you are able to use those same ideas to see if you align with the organization and the job as you're applying. The more you feel that the fit of that job and that organization is good for you, the more likely that is to come through during the application and interview process, and that can often lead to better results during your interviews. Another great benefit of looking at our values and comparing them to the values of organizations that we're looking at and jobs that we're looking at is that it can actually help us to open new doors and cast a wider net when we're applying for jobs and searching for jobs. A lot of times when we're looking at jobs, we may tend to zero in on the same industry that we've been in for a while. We may zero in on the same types of jobs that we've been in before. And often we are so hyper-focused on just getting in and applying for those jobs that we don't actually sit back and question whether we actually really enjoyed the job, whether we agreed with what the organization was aiming to do. And as we go through these different value areas that we're looking at today, I would encourage you to think more broadly about the types of industries, the types of organizations, and the types of jobs that you actually might be interested in. You may find that your experience working in an organization that isn't such a good fit for you for whatever reason may lead you to look into another industry. Maybe your work history in very competitive for-profit organizations may encourage you to actually try working for a nonprofit organization or vice versa. So let's go ahead and jump in, starting with the first of our 3 areas of values to examine. The first one is your ethical compass. Now, as some of you may know, my background is in anthropology of religion, and because of my educational background and studying world belief systems, I can very adamantly state that ethical compasses are set by a variety of factors: cultural norms, spiritual or religious beliefs, individual experiences, and the list goes on. Everybody's ethical compasses are going to be slightly different, which is why it's a good idea to examine them and get in touch with them on a regular basis, and make sure that the work that we do is aligned with our ethical compass. So let's start with an example. Once upon a time, when I was looking for jobs and I didn't feel at that point that I had the luxury of being picky about job offers and job opportunities, I applied for a position with a very well-known organization who shall remain nameless that espoused the exact opposite environmental, social, and political beliefs that I personally hold. The job itself was exactly in line with my experiences and skill set, and so I tried to overlook the larger moral question for me of working for this company. It absolutely did not align with my ethical compass, what I felt was right. When I told my sister that I had applied there, she paused for a minute and then said, "So you're selling your soul to the devil for a paycheck?" And that's why I'm not telling you the name of the company. I don't want to get sued. Now, thankfully, I did not get that job, and I say thankfully because I was able to find other work that perhaps paid a little bit less, but gave me a much stronger sense of alignment with my ethical compass, making the world a better place in ways that I define as being better, a focus on community service, a focus on ethical environmental standards, and so on. So, what are the points on your ethical compass? What are your guiding principles around what is right and what is wrong? Now, these are some big questions. So, let's look at an easier way to answer this question. Would you be proud of working for that company that you're applying for? Or would you feel you needed to justify working there to your family and friends because they know that your beliefs and your ethics are in contrast to what that organization's ethics are? So here's an even easier way to ask this question. And I have a feeling that as soon as I ask this one, you all are going to be able to come up with some answers right away. Are there companies that you would absolutely refuse to work for? Absolutely refuse. If they offered you the cushiest job with the nicest office and everything you could possibly want as far as job perks go, and you still say, nope, I wouldn't take the job. Why? Why would you refuse to work for them? On the flip side, are there companies that you would feel excited to work for? Why would you be excited to work for them? This can tell you a lot about what you value in an organization, and especially regarding alignment with your ethical compass and your beliefs about right and wrong. Now, what's interesting to me is that sometimes when I ask those questions, it's easier for people to list companies that they absolutely refuse to work for rather than companies that they would be excited to work for. It's good to know what companies we would not want to work for, because that may actually open up industries as a whole that we would not want to work for, and can guide us toward industries that might be more interesting for us to be involved in. And maybe these are industries we hadn't really thought about before as options. So as an example, that company that I applied for and was not happy with it, I learned some things about myself in that application process. I felt so icky and like I was just sort of selling myself out in applying for that position, that I didn't want to work in that industry at all. And instead, I decided that because I didn't want to work in that industry, because of their socio-political beliefs, the way that they treated their employees, and the impact that they had on the environment, that I was going to go in the exact opposite direction and start looking at companies in different industries that were going to support those things. And I was able to find work that aligned with my ethical compass. Now, another important piece to understanding and identifying our ethical compass points is finding our boundaries of that compass. So there may be concerns or issues that frankly are just not enough of a concern for you to not apply for a job in that industry or with that company that you might have some issues with, but it's nothing severe enough for you to just completely forego looking for jobs there. John C. Maxwell said, "When principle is involved, don't budge. Most matters, though, involve taste or opinion, not principle. In these areas, recognize that you can compromise." And this is what I mean by boundaries. Identifying your hard lines in the sand on your ethics, what is really critically important to you, and what maybe isn't as important to you, those sort of sidelines on your compass that you're not as worried about. Now, one other thought with these big questions that come up when we talk about the ethics of an industry or organization is that companies, especially large companies, have entire public relations departments that do work around messaging for that company to put on its most ideal face forward into the world. And a lot of these PR people are very good at their jobs. If any of you are PR folks who work for a large organization, I would love to hear from you and hear about your experiences trying to put that positive face maybe on a situation that wasn't so positive. I find that it's fascinating stuff. So if you aren't sure that a company has a similar ethical compass to yours, do an internet search. Take a little bit of time to find out if the company really does put their money where their mouths are, so to speak, or if they just have a really good public relations and marketing department, or maybe they've had one or two bad situations pop up that they have worked to correct the underlying issues, and everything seems to be much better now. We tend to focus on the negative in the news, and that's what tends to stick in our brains. And so sometimes we may have an organization that has had some bad press 5 or 6 years ago. They've taken dramatic steps to fix things, and the situation is much better. So take a little bit of time if you're not sure if a company, you find a job you're interested in, and you're not sure if that company has a similar ethical compass to yours. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention about having an ethical compass that is not aligned with an organization that you're considering working for. You have to be willing to decide if you can put up with a mismatched ethical compass in order to help change the organization to be more in line with your compass. Now, this can be exceptionally difficult at very large organizations unless you're coming in with enough expertise and at a high enough level of influence to really be able to enact change within that organization. But it's possible. It's possible to work toward influencing a company or even an industry to make things better. And by better, I mean being more in line with your own ethical compass, whatever that means. This is a long uphill battle for most people, and one that most of us would honestly not really be willing to take on, depending on the situation. I have been part of organizational groups trying to influence massive cultural change within very large organizations, and it can be really time-consuming and difficult to change the culture because culture is supported by underlying structures and the day-to-day interactions that go on within that organization, and that can be a lot of struggle to change that. It is not for the faint of heart, is what I'm saying here. But that is a possibility, especially if you are moving into perhaps an organization that's a little bit smaller and you think that there is an opportunity there for you to influence things in a perhaps different way. So that's our ethical compass. The next set of values are 2 out of 3 sets of values that we're going to be discussing today. These are related to organizational fit. Now, this is a talent management phrase. You'll hear it in human resources, and it's something that people who are trained to interview well are looking for during interviews with you. I think this should go both ways. As you're interviewing, you should also be looking for organizational fit within that company. And that starts for the individual job seeker very early in the job search process and not just in the interview. Although the interview is a great time to find out more about organizational fit than maybe you've been able to glean from online resources and maybe talking to people who work or have worked for the company in the past. Organizational fit. I'm talking about things like civic responsibility, involvement with community, very much in the news right now. And if that's important to you, then that's something that you need to pay attention to as you apply for jobs. And that obviously overlaps with ethical compass. Now, other ways that we can look at organizational fit. Is the company stable? Is it focused on long-term employment? Or is it someplace that people tend to work for just a few years before they move on to somewhere else? If stability is important to you, then that's something to pay attention to. Do you like to work in a more structured organization where everybody has very clear roles and responsibilities laid out, very clear policies and procedures? Or do you prefer to work in an environment where there's a lot of change? Maybe it's more of a startup type of atmosphere where you're building the plane while you're flying it. If the thought of building the plane while you're flying it stresses you out, you probably don't need to try working at a startup. Do you want to work in a place that is fun, friendly, open, where the CEO has an open door policy and everybody calls her by her first name? Or do you prefer a more formal, hierarchical structure, very clear structure in your organization? None of these are wrong. It's just related to preference and values and fit. Are you interested in working for a big international company where you're perhaps a small fish in a big pond, but you have opportunities to maybe move around within the company, move around into different locations? Or would you rather be the big fish in a small pond in a small or local company? Do you like a workplace that focuses on cutting-edge technology, state-of-the-art technology? Or are you really tired of learning new software programs? Do you prefer working in a more competitive environment or a less competitive environment? How about growth within the company, professional development within the company? Is that something that's very important to you? Or do you prefer working for an organization where you come in and you might be in the same role for several years before you move into another role? Is it important for you to work for a company that has a lot of prestige? Maybe you want to work for a Fortune 50 company. When somebody hears the name of your company, they know exactly what you're talking about and they go, ooh, and it gives you a sense of pride that you work there. Does that even matter to you at all? Do you appreciate working for a company that is the top of their industry, or maybe the newcomer that's challenging the status quo of an industry? Are you interested in working for a company that is comfortable with risk, or does risk totally stress you out? So these are the types of questions that you can ask yourself to get an idea about organizational fit. There are tons of different ways to think about organizational fit and lots of different categories to use, but this is just to give you an idea. If you've ever worked for a company where the organizational fit was just not there for you, you can probably attest to the fact that it can get really frustrating and stressful to be in that environment. And it can be especially frustrating when other people seem to be thriving while you're unhappy and you just can't quite put your finger on why. Sometimes that comes down to whether the organization's mission and way of working aligns with the way that you look at that industry and the way that they work. The third area that we're looking at today is a little bit smaller. It's about the job fit for you and the qualities of that job. Are they things you like to do? So there are tons of different ways to look at this. Do you like variety in your everyday job, or would you prefer to have a lot more routine, structured type of role? Do you like being challenged on your job, working on new projects all the time? Or would you rather go in and know that your work is going to be at a steady pace and you can go home without having a bunch of stress because you just had to take on a new project? Do you like to be the center of attention on projects? Or do you like to work in a team? Do you like to work as an individual? Or do you prefer to work in a team setting? Do you enjoy learning continuously on the job? Or would you prefer a job where the learning curve isn't quite so steep? Do you like details and being detail-oriented? Or are you more of a big picture person who doesn't really like to deal with the details? Do you like having an involved leader, or do you prefer to have lots of individual freedom in your job? Do you want the opportunity to travel with your work, or do you prefer to stay near to home? What about the physical environment of the company? Do you think that you would enjoy working in the physical environment that job would require? Do you like working from home, or do you prefer to work in an office setting? These are just a few components of thinking about job fit. Another way to think about this: what jobs have you had in the past that really floated your boat? Jobs that you really enjoyed doing, you got into the zone in those jobs and you would work and you didn't dread every day. Versus, what were jobs that you've had in the past that you were able to do but you just didn't really want to? You were capable, but you just had to drag yourself there. These answers can help point the way to understanding what's important for you in your job fit. And again, this is very individualized. Everybody has their own preferences on job fit. And reading through job descriptions as you start to apply for jobs, you're going to be able to start picking up on the job fit qualities. So, as an example, if they say things like, must enjoy working in a fast-paced environment, that means you're probably going to need to deal with a lot of change and you're going to have to do a lot of multitasking. If they talk about flexibility, you know that the job is probably not going to be all that routine. If they talk about being a self-starter, there may be opportunities for those of you who love to jump in, start new projects, maybe do some problem solving on your own without a lot of oversight. So you can start to pick up on these clues for job fit within the job description. Now, in a previous episode, we talked a little bit about skill versus will. I'm going to rehash this really quickly here in case you haven't listened to that podcast yet. But this comes up as we start talking about job fit. Skill is the ability to do a job. Will is the desire or willingness to do the job or the task. You can have very high skills, but not want to do the job. You can have low skills and not want to do the job. That makes the decision pretty easy. Don't apply for those. You can have high will to do the job, but you don't necessarily have the skills. Now, that can often be learned. Or ideally, you're going to have high will and high skill, meaning you have the skills to do the job and you want to do the job. So as you start thinking about job fit, think about skill versus will. It's not enough just to be able to do the job. You have to want to do the job. And that's what we're talking about really with the job fit. Can you do the job and do you want to do the job? So those are the three value areas that you bring to the table: your ethical compass, your organizational fit, and your job fit. It's a combination of big overarching ethical questions and smaller but still very important work-specific types of qualities. So now that your brain is primed to think about values, it's time for last call. As you go through your last call activities for this topic, please remember that values are tied to both our intellectual side and our emotional side. It's that gut instinct we have, it's what we love, but it's also using our minds to understand intellectually what we want and need. So first, I would like for you to identify 3 companies or industries that you absolutely do not want to work for. And why do you not want to work for them? List those out. And as you look at those answers of why you wouldn't want to work for those companies, what does that tell you about your ethical compass? The clearer you can get on your ethical compass, the better. Next, I'd like for you to come up with a list of 3, only 3, organizational fit values and 3 job fit values for yourself. Organizational fit values you can think of as the culture of the company. What kind of culture do you want to work in? Maybe you want to work in a very structured environment. Maybe you want to work in a very flexible environment that has lots of change and it's very quick and fast moving with a lot of innovation. Maybe you prefer to work for something a little bit more steady and stable. Job fit is more specific to the actual role and task. So do you prefer to have more autonomy and more freedom? Do you want to be able to make decisions? Do you prefer a competitive type of role, or do you prefer a collaborative type of role where you're working with a team versus working as an individual? The last piece of this last call, I would like for you to pick a company that you might be interested in working for. go to their website, go to the About Us section. Almost every company nowadays has one of these. And look at how they are marketing that company to prospective customers and prospective employees. What are the buzzwords that they're using, the key phrases that they're using to identify what their ethical compass is, what their organizational fit would look like. And then if you can find a job on their job board, look for organizational and job fit on that job description to see if you can find things that match or things that don't match with what you're looking for. This is all just about getting used to the idea of looking at work this way. This is a very different way than we normally approach the job search. We normally look for, do I know the software programs they need? Do I know how to do the skills that they're asking for? So this last call is all about just experimenting with this new way of looking at our ethical compass, our organizational fit, and our job fit values and how they relate to organizations that we may be interested in working for. So that's it for today. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. I'm very interested to hear from you. If you like this, subscribe, share with your friends who may also be looking for work or may be interested in making a career change. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody. Well, thanks for joining me. If you have suggestions, feedback, or just something random you want to share, email me at careerspeakeasy@gmail.com and come visit again soon. Cheers.